Book 1. Remnants of a Bloody Era. Written and composed by Daniel M. Dutcher in homage to the Elder Scrolls series. Introduction. Return of the Wandering Soul. The wind that swept down from the throat of the world no longer carried the scent of free pine and open sky. It smelled of ash, cold iron, and the faint, acrid tang of Thalmor incense that had settled over every hold like a second snow. Valkyr Rateborn stood at the final ridge of the Gerald Mountains, where the last drifts of high country frost gave way to the gold and blood red of Falkreath's autumn woods. The fur-trimmed hat sat low over his brow, its ear flaps stiff with years of mountain frost. A quiver of red-fletched arrows rode high on his back. The dark, swirling steel of his breastplate, scarred by claw and blade alike, caught the dying light like a quiet challenge. Beneath it, a heavy cloak of wolf and bear fur stirred in the breeze, the same cloak his father had once worn. 10 years had passed since the Dovakiin vanished after the defeat of Mirak. In the brief, bright season that followed, the Stormcloaks had driven the Legion from every corner of Skyrim, and even planted their banner in Bruma. For a heartbeat of history, it had seemed the Empire was finished. Then the Thalmor came in earnest. They returned with the full fury of the Empire behind them, an unending tide of golden-clad elves and imperial steel that poured north through the Gerol passes. Falkreath was the first to burn. Village after village fell. Every shrine to Talos was torn down, every priest and open worshipper put to the sword of the pyre. The Stormcloak armies shattered. Within a handful of years, the banners of the Empire flew once more over every hold, and the Thalmor's black and gold standards watched from every wall. Skyrim was reclaimed in full. The worship of Talos was not merely outlawed, it was extinguished. Those who still whispered the Ninth Divine's name did so in cellars and caves, or not at all. Valkyr had been 16 when his parents left. He could still see them in the doorway of the little cottage that no longer stood, his father's broad hand resting on the hilt of an old steel sword, his mother's eyes bright with a fierce, unspoken farewell. "Keep the fire lit," she had said. "We'll be home before the snows." They never returned. Less than a month later, the first Thalmor scouts appeared on the ridgelines. The Empire's war machines followed. The cottage, the neighboring homes, the entire settlement, everything became ash. Valkyr and the few friends who still drew breath fled into the high peaks. There, among the frozen passes and hidden caves of the Gerals, the boy who had once tracked deer through peaceful woods became something harder. Hunter, miner, wanderer, gatherer of whispers. He learned the secret trails the legions never found. He grew quiet, he grew dangerous. And every night when the stars wheeled above the snowfields, something in his blood called him north, back to the land that had been taken. Now, at 28, that call could no longer be denied. Valkyr stepped from the tree line onto the old game trail that had once led to his childhood home. The cottage was gone, of course. Only a blackened foundation and a single leaning chimney remained, half swallowed by wild roses and thorn. Beyond the next ridge, Imperial patrols still rode the roads. Thalmor Justitius still walked the streets of every city. The name of Talos was spoken only in the darkest corners, if it was spoken at all. Yet the path ahead remained. He adjusted the strap of his quiver, felt the familiar weight of the bow across his shoulders, and began to walk. The mountains behind him watched in silence. The conquered province of Skyrim waited ahead, wounded, occupied, and ripe for the rise of a new legend. The gates of Falkreath stood open beneath a sky the color of old iron. Valkyr, Rateborn, passed beneath the wooden arch without ceremony, the red-fletched arrows in his quiver whispering against one another with every step. The fur of his cloak was matted with mountain frost that had begun to melt in the milder air of the hold. Around him the town moved with the careful, muted rhythm of a place long under the boot. Imperial soldiers in steel and red stood at every corner. A pair of Thalmor justiciars drifted past the inn like pale shadows, their golden armor catching what little light the overcast day allowed. No one looked at them directly. No one spoke the name of Talos. The old shrine at the edge of the graveyard had been reduced to a blackened circle of stone and scattered ash. He spent the morning walking the muddy streets, listening more than speaking. Merchants kept their voices low. Children were hurried indoors when the justiciars passed. The air smelled of wet pine, wood smoke, and the faint metallic tang of fear that never quite left a conquered town. He had offered the carcass of a young elk, taken 2 days earlier in the high passes, to 3 different buyers. The first, a thin-gnawed butcher with a Thalmor seal on his stall, shook his head without even looking up. No market for elk, too gamey, people want venison or beef, nothing else moves. The second buyer, who ran a smokehouse near the graveyard, was kinder but no more helpful. Fresh meat's a hard sell these days. Soldiers take the best cuts for the garrison. What's left goes cheap if it goes at all. Venison and beef, that's what the officers pay for. Everything else sits until it turns. The third simply waved him off. Valkyr stood for a long moment in the center of the market square, the elk's weight heavy across his shoulders, and understood. Hunting had been survival in the mountains. Here it was a trade, and the trade had been narrowed to the 2 meats hardest to come by in a land of dense forest and watchful patrols. Deer were cautious. Cattle were guarded. Everything else was nearly worthless. He sold the elk for a handful of septims that would barely buy a night's lodging and a thin meal. Then he turned north, toward the deep woods beyond the town walls, and began again. The hunt lasted from late afternoon into the long blue dusk and then into true night. He moved through stands of ancient pine and birch whose leaves had turned the color of old blood. Tracks appeared and vanished. A young stag slipped away into thick undergrowth before he could draw. A larger buck led him in circles for nearly 2 hours before the trail went cold beside a frozen stream. The cold seeped through the seams of his armor. His breath came in white clouds. The bowstring bit into his fingers. Still he pressed on, deeper into the blackwoods west of Falkreath, where the trees grew close and the moonlight struggled to reach the forest floor. By the time the moon stood high, he had nothing to show for the hours but aching legs and a growing emptiness in his gut. He paused beside a fallen oak, one gloved hand braced against the rough bark, and closed his eyes for a single exhausted breath. That was when she spoke. "You're a long way from the roads, Hunter." The voice was low, velvet smooth, and far too close. Valkyr's eyes snapped open. He turned, hand already reaching for the axe at his belt. She stood no more than 10 paces away, half in shadow, half in the silver light that filtered through the canopy. Tall, pale. Dark hair fell in loose waves past her shoulders. Her eyes caught the moonlight and held it, too bright, too still. She wore a traveling cloak of deep crimson over dark leather, and at her throat a small blackened amulet shaped like a clenched fist gleamed coldly, the mark of Molag Bal. "I mean you no harm," she said, and smiled with teeth that were just a fraction too sharp. "The night is lonely. A man of your strength should not walk it alone." Velkir said nothing. His hand remained on the axe. The forest had gone unnaturally quiet. She took a slow step closer. The air around her seemed to thicken, heavy with a perfume that was not perfume, something older, richer, the scent of cold earth and old blood. "You have the look of one who has lost much," she continued, voice soft as falling snow. "Parents, home, purpose. The Empire and their elven masters took it all, did they not? They always do. But the darkness never takes, it only welcomes. Molag Bal offers strength to those strong enough to claim it. Eternal night, power without masters. No more running, no more scraping for scraps of meat while the justiciars grow fat." She was close enough now that he could see the faint red gleam deep in her pupils. Vampire, of course. A thrall or a true daughter of the Lord of Domination, it hardly mattered. The hunger in her gaze was the same. "Come with me," she whispered, lifting one pale hand toward his face. "Let the cold leave your bones. Let the night take the weight from your shoulders. You need only say yes." Velkai's answer was the sudden flash of his axe. She moved faster than any mortal had a right to. The blade scored her cloak and nothing more. In the next instant she was on him, cold fingers like iron bands locking around his wrist, the other hand seizing the front of his armor. She slammed him back against the fallen oak hard enough to drive the breath from his lungs. Her strength was monstrous. His free hand fumbled for the dagger at his hip even as black spots danced at the edges of his vision. "Stubborn," she purred, leaning in until her lips nearly brushed his ear. "I like stubborn." He drove a knee into her midsection and twisted, using the last of his mountain-hardened strength to hurl her sideways. She stumbled, more surprised than hurt, and he staggered free, axe raised once more. Every muscle in his body screamed. The long hunt had already drained him. Now the fight was burning through what little remained. His vision swam. His arms felt made of lead. She recovered with a hiss of pure fury and came at him again, fangs bared, eyes blazing crimson. Velkai met her charge with a desperate two-handed swing. Steel rang against something harder than bone. The impact traveled up his arms like a shock of lightning. He reeled. She did not. Her claws raked across his breastplate, scoring deep grooves in the dark steel and sending him stumbling backward over a root. He hit the ground hard. The axe spun from his grasp. The world tilted. She stood over him, smiling once more, the seductive mask slipping just enough to show the ancient hunger beneath. "Last chance, little Nord," she said. "The darkness is patient, but I'm not." Valkyr's hand closed around a broken branch. He tried to rise, his legs refused. Exhaustion crashed over him like a black wave. The edges of the forest began to fade. Somewhere far off, yet growing closer, came the sound of booted feet and raised voices. Iron, torches, the unmistakable clatter of imperial armor. The vampire's head snapped toward the noise. Her smile vanished. Valkyr, half-conscious against the cold earth, heard the first shouted order of the approaching guards just as the last of his strength slipped away.